Hello and welcome back. I'm Professor Peter Jonason, your stylish scientist, and I wanted to talk today about a question I'm always asked, and it's a question I don't really like. It's how do you spot a narcissist? If you look online, there's a million YouTube videos about various people saying this and that, and it's often just cherry picked out of the available literature, and it doesn't give you much kind of nuance to it, I don't think. Indeed, I was just on a podcast where they asked me that question, and it was like, how can you answer that? Because it's not as simple as it sounds. One single indicator doesn't mean the person is a narcissist. And even just a single indicator, only done once, is even more worthless than just a single indicator on its own, right? So these should be patterns of behavior. And they're not necessarily even going to be bad patterns of behavior. They're just simply patterns of behavior that suit that person in that particular circumstance. So it takes a bit of time to accumulate enough data to get a sense of, is this person narcissistic? But more importantly, are they narcissistic in a problematic way? There's something you might call a benign narcissist, which is not really acknowledged much in the literature. But a benign narcissist is basically if you take what you think of as narcissism, this really popular topic, narcissism, and you remove the darker sides of it. And those darker sides of it is psychopathy. Because as you know, the dark triad are three intercorrelated traits: psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism. And the removal of the darker traits, this is a statistical removal, because people are within themselves, kind of all three of these things to differing degrees. Then you get this kind of person who's just wants people to like them and is popular and maybe wants to be socially successful and things like that, but they're not aggressive. They don't feel a sense of entitlement, and all these kind of darker, undesirable aspects of narcissism. So what I thought I would do today is play a little game. And I independently wrote a list from my mind, and based on work that has been done by people far smarter than me in this book that we published. I was just the editor. People in this, much smarter than I am, wrote the chapters, of course. Based on what we know from modern research on personality, psychology in terms of narcissism, so not clinical narcissism. So that's one thing that people struggle with, is that they're always looking for the pathology side, but there's a lot more to, especially traits like narcissism. There's more nuance to a trait like narcissism than you might expect, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's the typical model that people take when they think of these traits is that they want to detect, deter, and destroy people who are characterized by these traits. And so there's always this, I want to find the person, and if I find one thing that tells me that they're a narcissist, I'm out. It's a deal breaker, right? It just, that's the end. I think that's a little premature. Granted, I think psychologists might be a little too, in their personal lives, might be a little too forgiving of some of these things because they try to understand people a lot. But nevertheless, I wrote a list of 10 independently based on the literature that's out there, this book that we wrote, things that I know as someone who's been studying narcissism in the context of the dark triad for, 15 something years, since 2009, 2008, so quite a while. And then I also asked Chat GPT, because what's Chat GPT going to do? It's going to draw on the corpus of information from the internet, which is what you usually get. So I thought, can these two lists kind of converge, and might they reveal different things in both lists? And so first we'll go over the Chat GPT list, and I'll talk about the 10 points in briefly that are revealed, and maybe why I don't think these belong, and maybe what they mean. And then I'll give you my list, and we'll see, maybe those lists have some similarities. But ultimately, this is about, here are 10 and ostensibly 20 potential what you'd call indicators. An indicator doesn't mean it's a guarantee. It simply means, hey, wait a minute, right? It's like if my dog is sick, right? If there's something wrong with Pedro, what does the doctor ask me? What does the vet ask me? Well, is he eating? That's an indicator of whether a dog is sick, right? Is he walking well? That's another indicator. Does he seem like he's sleeping more than usual? Another indicator. And so in psychology, especially in personality psychology and psychometrics, we often have to capture something that is uncapturable externally, like someone's attitudes, their personality, their values. Those things are not directly accessible, so we have to ask questions. We use questions, these are called indicators, statistically speaking, and we try to amalgamate them and to say, this person has these values, this person has this personality, all right? So the Chat GPT list to start, let me get my wine here. I have a Rioja tonight, okay? All right, so the first one is, this is Chat GPT, to remind you, is that they dominate conversations about themselves. Now, what I think Chat GPT was trying to say here was that these are people who often steer conversations to be about them, right? They don't necessarily dominate the conversations that are about them. You can't really do that because people will talk about you and you can't be there, right? But these are people who will steer the conversation in their direction. They might ask you questions that allow them to then show off how amazing they are. They might always try to bring it back to them, personalize it to them. So you're telling them a story about how your dog died, and they say, oh, 2 years ago, yeah, my dog died too. And now, this does sound a little bit like trying to empathize and say, like, I understand. But it's often the case that they make the conversation as much as possible about them. Now, this one case of showing empathy is not good enough to say this person is narcissistic, right? But instead, if it's a pattern of behavior, is what you always want for these. Another indication, according to ChatGPT, is that they lack empathy. Now, I have problems with this one because there's some evidence that say that they might have, this is narcissists in particular, might actually have empathy. In particular, narcissists versus, say, psychopaths are more likely to have narcissism because having empathy allows them to understand people so that they can, get the praise that they want out of the world. The psychopath is more like a bully in this case, doesn't really care about your feelings, and so this is the lack of empathy. Now, indeed, I don't even think psychopaths lack empathy. I think for them, the volume is turned down so low that they really just don't hear it. It's there in their brain, because they're a mammal, so it's there, at least probably there. It just takes the circumstances of their life and the circumstances that would generate them to feel empathy have to be amazing because of all the things that have kind of suppressed this behavior. We can't think of these people as necessarily pathological to the core. These are people who are likely to have been affected by circumstances in their lives that have said, it's good to be a jerk in the case of the psychopath. In the case of the narcissist, it's good to be, let's say, competitive or selfish, or to use a word I really like, agentic. The third one that ChatGPT offers us is that they seek constant validation. They want people to tell them they're beautiful. They want people to look up to them and admire them and things like that. Right? Number 4 from this list is they have an inflated sense of entitlement. Right? They think I'm owed something. Right? This causes problems for them, for example, at work when they think they're owed promotions or they think they're owed special privileges. Okay? Number 5 is they manipulate and they control. This is another one that I'm not too sure about in terms of psychopathy, in terms of narcissism. I think it's more psychopathy and Machiavellianism. Manipulation is a more Machiavellian feature, okay? And control is more of a psychopathy feature. So in terms of my thinking on these traits lately, it's gone away from the idea these are traits geared towards short-term mating, which is where my research started on these traits. And instead, these are ways to garner social influence. The narcissist wants social influence in the form of being popular. The Machiavellian wants influence, like wants to have power over other people. And the psychopath wants to dominate, so control, like dominate, to control others. So I'm not sure if narcissists really want to actually manipulate and control. Indeed, both of these tactics are rather hard tactics of influence, and we have data on this, of course. And hard tactics of influence are more likely to generate negative repercussions down the line. And narcissists don't want that because this means they're burning bridges of the very people that they need to be nice to them, to feed their ego, if you will. Okay. Number 6, they seem charming at first, but very quickly they become critical, and so they're they might approach you on the street, in a bar, something like that, and they're very charming, and then you say something and they get a little bit aggressive all of a sudden, like they take a very sharp turn. It's because they get kind of triggered, not only triggered in a kind of social justice warrior nonsense way, but they get triggered in the sense that something turns on, something threatened them, yep, and they are, for lack of a better word, their defense mechanisms activated. And the defense mechanism of externalizing people high on narcissism, psychopathy, dark triad, who often tend to be men, they externalize, right? So they are angry, they punish the world, right? This is in contrast to a more female approach, which is an internalizing solution to problems, which is where you get depression. As you know, women are much more likely to have depression than men are. Number 7 on this list is that they rarely take responsibility for their mistakes. And this is fairly reasonable. Why? Because they can't envision a world where they're bad, or they're afraid to admit that they're wrong, for example, because that causes this self-reflective process of, maybe I'm not as great as I think I am. And narcissists don't really want to do that, because part of being a narcissist is self-esteem. This is the old idea, the old Freudian thinking. This is something that, for example, Grandma Pauline often thinks, that, the narcissist just has low self-esteem. That doesn't seem to be the case. Most research suggests that there's a positive correlation between self-esteem and narcissism. And you don't even need a correlation to think this out. Almost the definition of a narcissist is someone who thinks good of themselves, thinks they're great. That's what self-esteem really is about, of course. This is a person that often lacks boundaries. Now, again, this is the Chat GPT list. I'm not sure I buy this particular item. I think this item might be more psychopathy. This is the transgressive nature of psychopathy. I don't think narcissists are likely to be transgressive. Remember, there's this benign narcissism. When you're just talking about narcissism purely, not its correlated deleterious other features like psychopathy. Narcissism on its own, I don't think, has this kind of boundary crossing approach to the world. They very care about how other people think of them. Right? 9, they show superficial charm but they lack genuine connections. Right? They have superficial relationships. They're good at being like James Bond, for example. Right? They're very good at chatting people up, but those relationships don't often go anywhere, because quickly the curtain is pulled aside to the Wizard of Oz, and you see that there's not much substance there. But this is a person, to use the saying, they are all flash and no photo, right? And that there's no substance, right? They're flash, right? There's like, wow, this person is amazing, and so you meet them at a bar, it's like, wow, this is so fun, oh my god, and then you a couple days go by and you're like, this person has nothing to offer me. All right. Number 10 on this list from Chat GPT is they are overly sensitive to criticism. I'll take this one. I think this has to do with their inability to really face the facts of their own shortcomings, right? And that they really don't want to swallow that criticism. And it feels like an attack to be criticized. I mean, now some of these are a little bit redundant to one another, certainly. But if you boil them all down, I think maybe we have like 5 or 6 here that are reasonable. Now, remember, before I ran this Chat GPT thing, I wrote a list myself of 10 other indicators that I think might be. Now, I just picked 10 because I like the idea of the number of 10. There used to be this show, the David Letterman show, and they had these top 10 lists, and they were always very funny. Well, they weren't always very funny, but they were funny, and they made books of this, and I enjoyed them. And so 10 is just a random number that I picked out of my brain. 10, 20, 30, 40. Probably the more indicators, the better, because you can count them up over time, right? And so it gives you a better sense. But here are some just, 10 from ChatGPT, and here are 10 from me as a researcher in this area. Okay, number 1, they take rejection or failure poorly. And this applies to different contexts, right? In the romantic context, they don't take rejection well. There's an idea of what's called narcissistic reactance, which is the pushback that a narcissist will give when they are romantically rejected. And this is kind of like where they might be mean to you, or they might even talk badly about you to other people, for example. Or they might just be like, well, I'm better than you, and this kind of stuff, right? And it also applies to the workplace. So professional failures will also affect these people because, again, it comes back to this problem they have with facing the fact that they're not as amazing as they think they are. So it's like they've drank their own Kool-Aid and they don't want to try another flavor because then they're like, oh, wait, this flavor is better than my other flavor. That can't be true, right? That can't be possible. Right? So nevertheless, they don't take romantic or professional rejections, right? Like getting fired, getting demoted, not getting a promotion, things that violate their sense of specialness. Another one, which is one that I think we all are aware of, is that they look down on other people, and it's not necessarily they look down on other people, because I can think of myself as superior to other people for legitimate reasons, right? Like I am more educated in this particular topic, or I have nicer clothes, or I have more books, or there are objective ways to be better than other people, of course. We have to be okay with this idea, right? There are individual differences in how good or bad people are. But what's the problem is what comes from this. So my opinion of someone being beneath me, right, is very different than me treating them like they're beneath me, right? I can recognize that the 19-year-old server, or even the 25-year-old woman I might meet at a bar is beneath me in terms of life experience, in terms of age, and all kinds of things, right? Not morally beneath me. None of this. Don't get too upset here, right? But if I treat them poorly, right? If you are rude to waiters, this is usually a red flag in a lot of contexts that say, this is not this. I should pay attention to this information, right? This person is not nice. The way you treat the help is a red flag for narcissism, I think. Okay. Number 3, my list. Number 3, they seek external validation. Again, we said this before, but now I'll give you a little more nuance to this. And we know some nuance to this because the internet is this amazing place. And what you see is that the validation that men seek tends to be sexual conquest in nature, right? Because that's what's unavailable to them. That's kind of the fuel for men's evolved psychological systems, is that if I can get lots of women to choose me, it means I'm valuable. And so this is one of the reasons why narcissistic men will engage in kind of promiscuous behavior, because it is this kind of innate evolved drive that they have kind of on hyperdrive, if you will. Now, in a contrast, this is where porn is problematic for men, because it feeds men the very information that men's brains are kind of dying for, right? But in contrast, this is for women. It's the Instagram problem. The Instagram problem is that it's attention, and so women can get lots and lots of attention, and so the narcissistic woman is an attention seeker. The narcissistic man is a sexual attention seeker, but the narcissistic woman is just an attention seeker. Why? Because over evolutionary time, men who gave women attention were more likely to provision resources to her and her offspring. So her brain is kind of tuned into men's willingness, because attention is almost a green flag for the probability that this man is going to invest. No, it doesn't mean that men don't want attention from women in a non-sexual way, of course, and women want sexual attention. But statistically speaking, men's attention seeking tends to be fueled by sexual motives, and women's attention seeking tends to be more fueled by, let's call it, self-protective status, accumulating resources. Okay, now number 4, similar to the other list, is that they expect special access and favors. Now, what can I say about this more? Well, look, a lot of us have spent many days and nights and weeks of our lives going to nightclubs and bars and things like that. And if you are one of those people, you will know who the narcissist likely is. And these are the people who expect VIP treatment. These are people who are likely to get bottle service. These are people who want to be let in through the door, ahead of everybody, things like that, right? They want to be put on the list, if you will, right? They want to be, I'm special, right? I want to be treated like I'm special, right? I don't want to have to leave my credit card with you with the bar when I just want to go and do my thing, and I'll pay you later, of course. You can trust me. Now, I've been in this situation where, like, for example, there was a bar that I used to go to in Italy called 100%. These people were amazing to me. I mean, I think they were amazing to me because they loved Pedro, right? But I could go and get drinks from wherever I wanted. They would bring me drinks. I didn't have to pay. Everyone else really had to pay immediately. Sometimes the bar would close and I wouldn't get to pay, and I would just go pay another day, right? So I built up this kind of relationship, of course, right? But this is the kind of special favors, like, oh, well, just have my wine and I'll walk around the city and enjoy myself. Okay, number 5 for my list. This is similar to number 1 from the Chat GPT list now. They seek to dominate social events. Now, the number 1 was about conversation. This is a little broader. This is where they try to dominate social events in general, right? This is conferences. You can kind of tell the narcissist at a conference because of their kind of bombastic behavior. They're trying to be the center of attention. Remember, this is what this person really wants, is all eyes on me. There must have been a song about this, I think, by some rapper in the 90s or the 2000s, all eyes on me. I can't remember, maybe it was Tupac or something. But they want to dominate, because if they dominate the space, whether it's by talking a lot, or by occupying a physical position that is central, or by occupying positions of power in the organizations, whether they be professional organizations or social organizations, they're able to basically dominate. And that domination draws attention to them. People look at them, and that's what they want. They want to be looked at. They want to be noticed. Okay. Number 6 on my list is not one that we saw before, but it's a little bit similar to this narcissistic reactance idea. But they're obsessed with being respected, right? This is the person who feels threatened. Their power feels threatened when somebody doesn't talk to them the right way or whatever it is, right? And so because they're really geared around, remember, not sexual conquest, the trait is really geared around people respecting, thinking that you're cool and popular and all those things. These people are hypersensitive to violations of this. If I think you're disrespecting me, this is where, like, okay, now we got to fight. I got to do something to rectify the disrespect. The narcissistic reactance is just that disrespect in the romantic context. But in general, these are people who are really concerned with how much other people respect them, and it really bothers them if people don't respect them. Again, professionally, romantically, sexually. Right? This is a person who's going to have, maybe sexual kind of inferiority complexes because if the woman doesn't think I'm good enough in bed, that she doesn't respect me as a man, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Number 7 for my list is that they're terrible at remembering what they do wrong. I hope this makes perfect sense. If I remember what I do wrong, then I'm going to go home and I'm going to ruminate, and I might have to self-reflect. Right? I'm going to think like, wow, I've done some horrible things to people. Now, I imagine these people do this at some degree, and this is one of the reasons why there is at least some depression among people who are narcissistic, but there is some degree also of buffering, because these are people who keep creating new relationships, so they escape the prison of those costs. Indeed, my research on preferences for where people live, people in narcissism say they want to live in cities more than they want to live in, say, rural areas or beaches or things like that, small towns. And one of the reasons that they specify is because there are more places to hide and more targets to exploit. Like, they're willing to just say this. They're not hiding this. So they want to be able to jump. And so in cities, I can go offend people. So I'm here in Warsaw, no surprise, right? So let's say I go to a bar in Warsaw that's called Sen, and I go a lot to Sen. Let's say I don't, but let's say I go a lot to Sen. And let's say I'm also narcissistic, but a little more narcissistic than I already am. And I start offending a lot of people. I start rubbing some girls the wrong way. I start getting into kind of like, maybe not fights, but like respect conflicts with men. Maybe I start having some issues with some of the staff, right? So what do? I move to another bar in Warsaw. Maybe I go to, say, La Vie. Maybe I go to SLA or whatever it is. And so you kind of operate into a new crowd, and now you're a stranger. And your slate is more or less clean. Now, I'm using Warsaw as an example, which is not very good, because as any of my friends in Warsaw will tell you, it's a surprisingly small town for a city. We often end up knowing each other without knowing each other, because the social scene is not as big or as anonymous, especially among the expats / people who speak kind of fluent English. We all kind of somewhat know each other. It's like that 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon problem. All right. Anyways. Number 8, this is similar to the last. They rarely take accountability for for their mistakes. So they're not people who are likely to say that they're sorry, but what I added to this was they demand sorry from others. So they are less likely to apologize for their mistakes. Remember, the mistakes that they probably don't remember anyways in the first place. But that they're also likely to demand apologies from people for maybe relatively minor transgressions. To go back to issue 6 of my list, is that they see these things as a matter of respect. If you don't apologize to me, you don't respect me, and this is, I can't take that, right? I will not deal with you not respecting me, right? That's my line, that's my deal breaker, if you will, all right? As a narcissist, right? Not me, of course, right? Never me, never me. Okay, number 9. We find ourselves in situations where we're doing work with groups. And sometimes our work is successful, and sometimes our work is a failure. These are people who are likely to take group successes as a personal victory, but they will deflect blame. They will blame you. They will not take the failure as something that is an affront to them. Now, there's several psychological mechanisms, and we've already talked about some of them about why this might be the case. But what I haven't mentioned is that these are people who are what's called reward sensitive. And they're not threat or punishment sensitive, I should say, punishment sensitive. So they don't really adjust their behavior well to punishments, right? Like failures, like getting an F on an exam, let's say. But they're likely to go where there are rewards. And so they're dopaminergically motivated people. Dopaminergic? That's not right. Dopamine motivated people. And so this taking credit is this like, yeah, we are successful. I'm part of the team now. So they'll be part of the team during the victory. But when the team is failing, they don't have any honor to the team, right? They have no loyalty to the team. I'm out. I don't like those people now. They're not very good, etc., etc. They'll be a traitor, if you will, actually. All right? And lastly on my list is 10. They have superficial relationships. And this is an issue from the last one, of course. So in the beginning, as we said, they're very good at creating superficial relationships. This is what you have when you first meet people. The process of getting to know people, let's say romantically, is a process of moving from the superficial, quote unquote. I don't mean superficial in a negative way. Superficial as in the surface, the things you see when you look at someone from afar, moving through things that you can get to know relatively easily to the things you get to know that take a little bit more time. So remember my research on mating, and we move through physicality preferences, right? So height, weight, hair color, do they have hair, gray, teeth, smell, all these things. Clothes even, physicality preferences then give way to the potential to, is this a nice person? Are they a competent person? Okay, yes, okay. Now we move forward, and now we get to the harder bit of compatibility. And so these are people who are very good at getting you through the physicality part, and they're not so good about getting you past the compassion and the competence part. Why? Because of the compassion part, they tend to be a little bit cold to other people, right? They're not very good at emotionally connecting to other people because of this superficiality, this tendency to talk about themselves too much. But they're also not particularly competent in the way Jordan Peterson would describe it, which is what the narcissist, especially the younger narcissist, does, is that they confuse people with confidence instead of competence, right? So they seem like they fake competence, but eventually you shake that out a little bit, and it turns out they're not. So maybe they tell you that they're, they have a Ferrari, and then it turns out that they have a Fiero for a car, or maybe they tell you that they're a professor, but it turns out they're only a grad student, things like that, right? And so all of these, they don't get past that line, right? So they get to the physical, right? This is probably a good-looking person. They go to the gym. They have nice clothes, right? They speak well. But they fall down on this next stage in the romantic process. And so one of the reasons these people have lots of relationships is not necessarily because they're trying to jump from relationship to relationship. It's that they can't convert these initial encounters into something more meaningful, right? And so they just keep failing. And remember, because they don't learn from their failures, they don't change what they're doing. So they keep repeating the pattern and keep having more, more casual sex relationships, more relationships that only last a little while, more situationships, all these kinds of things. All right? So I hope this was mildly informative and hopefully a little bit entertaining. It's a little bit depressing that Chat GPT gives such rather good, if I'm honest with you, feedback, right? You don't really need to go to some therapist or watch all these videos and all this kind of stuff, right? You could just ask Chat GPT, and I imagine as Chat GPT gets better, its content will get better because information like I'm putting out there, information, again, like my book, well, this is, again, I don't want to say it's my book, it's the book I edited, other people did the work. I'm just, this makes me sound like an even worse narcissist. They did the work, I'm taking the credit. No, they did the work, it's great, I just put it together for them. Yeah, so that's it for now. I'm talking probably too long. Hopefully you stuck around for all these 30 minutes. I hope you like this. Like, share, subscribe. Ciao.